Oh, those eyes. They're there in my brain.
This is the sound of a grown man, a World War II veteran, with an IQ of 140, breaking down in hysterical sobbing during a hypnosis session in 1964. What could reduce a decorated soldier to tears? What terror could be so profound that it would haunt him for the rest of his life? Welcome to Whispers of the Dark, and this the story of Betty and Barney Hill, the couple whose encounter on a lonely New Hampshire road in 1961 would become the most famous alien abduction case in history. A case so detailed, so terrifying, and so inexplicable that it would define every alien encounter story that came after it. This is the case that gave us the gray aliens you see in movies. This is the story that introduced the world to the concept of missing time. And most disturbingly, this is a case that has never been explained. Before we dive into that fateful September night, you need to understand who Betty and Barney Hill were, because their story is as much about America in the 1960s as it is about what happened to them. Betty Hill was born Eunice Barrett in 1919. She was a social worker who handled some of the most difficult child welfare cases in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She had a degree from the University of New Hampshire and was known for her dedication to helping vulnerable children.
Barney Hill was born in 1922. He was a black man who had served his country in World War II and now worked for the United States Postal Service, often making brutal 60-mile commutes and working night shifts. But what made the Hills truly remarkable for their time was this: they were an interracial couple in 1960s America. Barney was black, Betty was white, and they were married at a time when such unions were not just uncommon, they were dangerous. The Hills weren't just going through life trying to survive. They were active members of their local Unitarian congregation. They were both members of the NAACP. Barney even sat on a local board of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. In other words, these were serious, credible, community-minded people. They weren't looking for attention. They weren't conspiracy theorists. They were exhausted activists who just wanted a vacation. By September 1961, the Hills had been married for 16 months, but had never taken a proper honeymoon. Both worked grueling hours, Barney on night shifts, Betty dealing with traumatized children. They finally carved out time for a 3-day trip to Niagara Falls and Montreal. It was supposed to be relaxing. It was supposed to be normal. It was anything but. The Hills left a diner in Vermont around 10 p.m., hoping to make it back to Portsmouth by 2 a.m. They were driving south through the White Mountains of New Hampshire on Route 3, an isolated, winding road with dense forests on either side. Just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, Betty noticed something strange, a bright point of light in the sky. At first, it seemed to be near the moon and Jupiter, but then it moved. It moved upward, to the west of the moon, and then it started following them. Mile after mile, the light stayed with them.
Sometimes it would disappear behind trees, only to reappear moments later. It grew bigger, brighter. Barney, a World War II veteran and plane enthusiast, wasn't initially concerned. He figured it was probably a satellite that had gone off course, or maybe some kind of aircraft. But as they continued driving through those dark, twisted mountain roads, the light's behavior became impossible to explain. Eventually, their curiosity overpowered their fear. They pulled over to investigate. Betty grabbed their binoculars and looked up. What she saw made her blood run cold. This wasn't a satellite. This wasn't a plane. This was something else. Something structured. Something deliberate.
Barney grabbed the binoculars and his handgun from the car. He stepped into the darkness of that lonely New Hampshire highway and looked up. What he saw was massive, as big as a jet, but as flat as a pancake. It had backed wing fins with red lights that telescoped out from its sides. A long structure descended from the bottom of the craft, and then it came closer. The craft descended until it hovered between 50 to 80 feet above Barney's head, about 300 feet away. Through rows of windows, he could see figures, beings. They wore gray uniforms and seemed to look directly at him. Barney tried to raise his pistol. He couldn't. His hand wouldn't move. A voice, not spoken out loud, but inside his head, told him to put down his binoculars. And then a single thought overwhelmed everything else. We're about to be captured. Barney screamed. He ran back to the car, yelling hysterically. Betty asked what he saw. All he could say was, "They're going to capture us." Barney floored the gas pedal and sped down the dark highway. Betty craned her neck out the window, tracking the craft as it followed them.
Then, without warning, loud, rhythmic beeping sounds came from the car's trunk. Beep, beep, beep. The hills felt instantly drowsy. Their eyelids grew heavy, and then nothing. The next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the road near Concord. 2 hours had passed. They had no memory of what happened during that time. When they finally pulled into their driveway in Portsmouth at dawn, they were exhausted, confused, and terrified. The Hills arrived home, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. As they inspected themselves and their car, they found disturbing evidence. Barney's shoes were strangely scuffed. Betty's dress was torn and covered in an unidentified powder. Both of their watches had stopped working. The binocular strap was broken. There were shiny concentric circles on the car's trunk that hadn't been there before. When they held a compass near the circles, the needle spun wildly. A few inches away, it dropped back to normal. Barney felt compelled to examine his body, specifically his lower half. He had an odd, disturbing feeling that someone had collected his semen.
The following day, the Hills called the nearby U.S. Air Force Base in Portsmouth to report what they'd seen. But they withheld most of the details. They were terrified of being labeled crazy. The Hills reported their sighting to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, and spoke with investigator Walter Webb on October 21, 1961. During a 6-hour interview, Barney stated that he had developed a mental block and suspected there were portions of the event he didn't wish to remember. Betty spent hours at the library, researching UFOs and trying to make sense of what had happened. In the days and weeks that followed, Betty began having vivid, recurring nightmares. In these dreams, she and Barney were taken aboard a craft by humanoid beings. They were separated, examined, tested. The dreams were so intense, so detailed, that Betty started writing them down. Barney, meanwhile, developed ulcers. His anxiety grew worse. He became increasingly withdrawn.
After 2 years of suffering, of nightmares, anxiety, and inexplicable physical symptoms, the Hills decided to seek help. On December 14, 1963, they visited Dr. Benjamin Simon, a Boston-based psychiatrist and neurologist renowned for his expertise in hypnotherapy. Simon had treated World War II veterans for post-traumatic stress and was considered one of the best in his field. Simon was skeptical about UFOs, but he recognized that Barney, in particular, was suffering from extreme trauma similar to what he'd seen in war veterans. Over the course of several months, through weekly hypnosis sessions, Dr. Simon helped the Hills piece together what they believed had happened during those missing 2 hours. What they remembered was beyond terrifying. Under hypnosis, both Betty and Barney described remarkably similar experiences, despite being hypnotized separately to prevent cross-contamination of their stories. According to their accounts, after hearing the beeping sounds, the craft landed on or near their car. They felt an overwhelming drowsiness and lost consciousness. When they came to a stop, they were being walked up a long ramp by gray-skinned beings with large almond-shaped eyes. The beings were shorter than humans, about 4 to 5 feet tall. They wore tight-fitting gray uniforms. The Hills were taken into a circular room with curved walls and a large light hanging from the ceiling. The craft felt metallic and cold. Betty and Barney were separated. Each was taken to what appeared to be an examination room and told to undress and lie on a metal table. What happened next is difficult to hear. The beings conducted extensive medical examinations on both Betty and Barney. They took samples of their hair, nails, and skin. They poked them with needles. They examined their eyes, ears, and mouths. One of the most disturbing details, Betty described a 6-inch needle being inserted into her stomach. When she cried out in pain, the being who seemed to be the leader waved his hand over her abdomen, and the pain instantly stopped. Betty believed this was some kind of crude pregnancy test. Barney's examination was even more invasive. His description matches what many abduction researchers now call a sperm sample collection.
Under hypnosis, Barney became hysterical when describing the being's eyes. He sobbed uncontrollably, saying, "Oh, those eyes! They're there in my brain!"
He described them as having the ability to communicate telepathically, placing thoughts directly into his mind. Interestingly, Barney also described seeing one figure aboard the craft who looked different from the others. A man with a nasty look, wearing what appeared to be a Nazi-style uniform. This detail has fueled speculation that human collaborators may have been involved. One of the most famous and controversial aspects of Betty's account is the star map. Under hypnosis, that he recalled that during her examination, one of the beings showed her a three-dimensional projection of stars. The map displayed various stars connected by lines. Betty asked what the lines meant. The being explained that the solid lines represented regular trade routes, while the dashed lines indicated expeditions, places they had explored but didn't visit regularly. Betty was fascinated. She asked where Earth was on the map. The being pointed to a small dot on one of the dashed lines, suggesting that Earth was just an occasional stop for these travelers, not a major destination. When Betty asked where the beings came from, the being pointed to two stars connected by a thick line. Betty asked if she could take the map with her. The leader seemed amused and said something to the effect of, "There would be no point. You know nothing of the universe." After the examinations were complete, the Hills were walked back down the ramp. The beings told them they would not remember what had happened. They were placed back in their car.
The beeping started again, and then they woke up 35 miles down the road with no memory of the past 2 hours. After her hypnosis sessions, Betty attempted to recreate the star map from memory. She drew a rough sketch showing about 15 stars connected by various lines. For years, the map meant nothing. It was just a strange drawing from a bizarre story. But then, in the late 1960s, an elementary school teacher and amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish became fascinated by Betty's map. Fish wondered, could this map correspond to a real region of space? Using the 1969 Gliese catalog of nearby stars, Fish spent nearly 5 years constructing three-dimensional models of stars within 55 light-years of Earth. She used wire and beads, carefully positioning each star based on its actual location in space. She viewed these models from thousands of different angles, trying to find a match for Betty's drawing.
And then she found one. From one specific vantage point, a viewpoint slightly above the double star system of Zeta Reticuli,
Fish's model matched Betty Hill's drawing with stunning accuracy. Zeta Reticuli is a binary star system about 39.5 light-years from Earth in the constellation Reticulum. It consists of two sun-like stars separated by at least 3,750 astronomical units. Both stars are similar to our sun in size and age. Here's what made Fish's discovery so compelling. 1. Betty drew the map in 1964, years before accurate stellar distance data was widely available. 2. The stars Betty included were a very specific subset of nearby stars, stars that theoretically could support life. 3. Betty even included 3 stars that weren't discovered until after she drew the map. Fish concluded, since we did not have the data to make such a map in 1961 when Betty saw it, or in 1964 when she drew it, it could not be a hoax. Since the stars with lines to them are such a select group, it is almost impossible that the resemblance between Betty's map and reality could be coincidental.
Of course, not everyone was convinced. Skeptics pointed out several problems. 1. The map appears to be drawn from a viewpoint near Earth, not from an alien civilization light-years away. 2. Hypnosis can produce false memories. People under hypnosis can create detailed but entirely fabricated narratives. 3. The human brain is wired to see patterns even where none exist, a phenomenon called apophenia. 4. With enough stars to choose from, you can probably find a pattern that matches almost any random drawing. Even the Hill's psychiatrist, Dr. Benjamin Simon, remains skeptical. He believed their story emerged from unaddressed psychological incapacities, the stress of being an interracial couple, and possibly Barney's repressed trauma from the war. Simon thought Barney's memories might have been influenced by Betty's dreams. But here's the thing. Simon also acknowledged that Barney had experienced genuine, profound trauma. Whatever happened that night, whether extraterrestrial or psychological, it was real to them. The Betty and Barney Hill case didn't just become famous, it literally changed the way we think about alien encounters.
Before 1961, aliens in popular culture were often portrayed as friendly visitors, like in The Day the Earth Stood Still. After the Hills story became public in 1965, alien abductions became synonymous with fear, medical examinations, and missing time. Their case inspired countless TV shows, movies, and books. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, The X-Files, Fire in the Sky, and recently Prometheus, which features a star map based on Betty Hill's drawing. The gray aliens with large black eyes that we all recognize today, that image comes from the Hills description. So what really happened on that September night in 1961?
Here are the facts we know for certain. 1. Betty and Barney Hill drove through the White Mountains and arrived home hours later than expected with no memory of the time in between. 2. They had physical evidence: torn clothing, stopped watches, scuffed shoes, and strange marks on their car. 3. They experienced genuine psychological trauma that lasted for years. 4. Under hypnosis, they described experiences that matched each other's accounts despite being hypnotized separately. 5. Betty Hill drew a star map that appears to correspond to a real region of space.
But we also know: 1. Hypnosis can produce false memories. 2. The stress of being an interracial couple in 1960s America was immense. 3. No physical evidence of alien technology was ever recovered. 4. The star map could be a coincidence or the result of pattern recognition. 5. Barney Hill died of a stroke in 1969 at age 46, possibly due to the stress of the experience and its aftermath. He never wavered from his story. 6. Betty Hill continued to investigate UFOs for the rest of her life. She died of lung cancer in 2004 at age 85, still maintaining that the abduction occurred. To this day, the Betty and Barney Hill case remains unsolved. It's considered by many to be the most credible alien abduction case in history, not because it's been proven, but because of who the Hills were and the evidence they left behind. Some historians, like Matthew Bowman, believe the story is less about aliens and more about the racial fears and social anxieties of 1960s America. Others believe something genuinely unexplained happened on that lonely New Hampshire road. In 2011, the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources erected a historical marker at the site where the encounter allegedly began. It doesn't claim the abduction was real. It simply acknowledges that something happened, something significant enough to change American culture forever.